Chapter 1: Inheritance and Last Chance. The GPS had given up 2 miles back. Rowan Hart gripped the steering wheel of her 15-year-old Honda as it climbed another winding curve through what felt like the set of a Pacific Northwest tourism commercial, all dripping moss, towering Douglas firs, and fog thick enough to taste. The rental agreement back in Seattle hadn't mentioned anything about roads that seemed designed to pitch unwary drivers straight into the ocean. In half a mile, turn right, her phone insisted from the cup holder, its confidence unearned. There was no right turn, just more trees, more fog, and the occasional glimpse of gray water far below. Rowan's phone buzzed. Another text from Marcus, her ex-husband. She didn't look. 3 months since the divorce was finalized, and he still hadn't grasped the concept of boundaries. Or maybe he had and just enjoyed crossing them. The road finally spilled her into something resembling civilization, a downtown strip of weathered buildings clinging to the hillside like barnacles, their painted signs advertising organic groceries, a used bookstore, a place called the Rusty Anchor that either was a bar or a health hazard, probably both. Tides End, Oregon. Population 3,848, according to the faded sign she'd passed. Make that 3,848, at least temporarily. She found a parking spot on Main Street, not difficult given that it was 4 p.m. on a Wednesday and the town seemed to be operating on some kind of communal nap schedule. A few locals drifted past, a man in rubber fishing boots, a woman with a canvas tote bag overflowing with kale, a teenager absorbed in her phone. No one looked at Rowan. Small towns were supposed to notice strangers, weren't they? Maybe they'd already decided she wasn't interesting. They'd be right. Rowan checked the address the lawyer had sent. 47 Harborview Lane. She was 2 blocks away from her inheritance, her obligation, and, if she was efficient, her ticket back to real life within the week. The walk gave her time to study Tides End properly. It had that aggressively quirky charm she associated with towns that depended on summer tourists and rich people's second homes. Hand-painted murals on brick walls, chalkboard signs promising locally roasted and small batch and sustainable. A gallery window displaying driftwood sculptures that cost more than her car. She'd Googled the town exactly once the night the lawyer called. Tides End, a hidden gem on Oregon's central coast, known for its thriving arts community, pristine beaches, and the annual Moonlight Festival. The photos had shown sunset vistas and people in expensive fleece vests holding wine glasses. Not a single image had included the thing Rowan cared about, an espresso machine that actually worked. Harborview Lane was less a lane and more an alley that had delusions of grandeur. The buildings here were older, their wood siding weathered silver gray, their foundations settling into the hillside at vaguely concerning angles. Salt air had its way with everything this close to the water. And there it was, Moonrise Brewing. The Café occupied the ground floor of a narrow 3-story building wedged between a pottery studio and what looked like an abandoned fish processing plant. The sign above the door featured a crescent moon and a steaming cup, hand-painted in faded blues and golds. The windows were dark. A "closed until further notice" sign hung crooked on the door. Rowan's chest tightened. She'd seen exactly 3 photos of her grandmother in the last 20 years. Birthday cards had arrived sporadically, always with a $5 bill tucked inside and a note in spidery handwriting. Buy yourself something sweet. Love, Grandma Iris. Rowan had cashed the bills and thrown away the cards because she'd been 16 and angry, then 20 and angrier, then 30 and just tired. The last card had come 4 years ago. She'd kept that one, though she couldn't say why. It was in a box somewhere in her Seattle apartment, probably buried under takeout menus and divorce papers. Her grandmother had died 6 weeks ago. A stroke, sudden and complete. The lawyer had tracked Rowan down through some bureaucratic miracle, and now here she was, heir to a cafe she'd never visited, in a town she'd never heard of, inheriting a relationship she'd never maintained. Congratulations, she thought bitterly. You've won absolutely nothing. The key the lawyer had sent was heavy and old-fashioned, brass worn smooth from decades of use. It turned in the lock with a solid click that seemed too loud in the fog-muffled street. The door swung open. Stale air greeted her, thick with dust and the ghost of old coffee. Rowan stepped inside and fumbled for a light switch. The cafe materialized around her in warm yellow light. It was smaller than she'd expected, maybe 30 feet deep and 20 wide, but every inch was crammed with personality. Mismatched wooden tables and chairs, some painted, some bare, shelves along one wall overflowing with used books and board games, a massive chalkboard menu still listing drinks in elaborate script, moonbeam mocha, tidal wave latte, solstice blend. Plants everywhere, hanging from the ceiling in macrame holders, climbing up the exposed brick, clustering on every flat surface. Most of them were dead or dying, their leaves brown and crispy. Behind the counter, dominating the back wall like an altar, stood the espresso machine. Rowan had worked in enough coffee shops during college to recognize quality equipment when she saw it. This machine was neither modern nor cheap. It looked Italian, or maybe older than Italian. Brass and copper and intricate valves, polished to a dull shine, with a presence that seemed almost... Stop it, she told herself. It's a machine. It makes coffee. That's literally all it does. Still, she found herself walking towards it, one hand reaching out before she'd consciously decided to move. Her fingers brushed the warm brass. The cafe lurched. Not physically, the floor stayed solid beneath her, but everything seemed to tilt sideways for a heartbeat. The light shifted, became afternoon sun instead of overhead bulbs. The plants were green and thriving. A woman stood behind the counter, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a loose bun, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she tamped espresso grounds. She looked up, directly at Rowan, and smiled. The vision snapped away like a broken rubber band. Rowan jerked her hand back, heart hammering. The cafe was dim and dusty again, plants dead, silence pressing in from all sides. Okay, that was low blood sugar, or carbon monoxide, or a minor stroke. Definitely not... A soft thump from somewhere overhead cut her off. Rowan froze. Hello? Nothing. Then another thump, followed by what might have been footsteps across old floors. The lawyer had mentioned an apartment above the cafe, fully furnished, included in the property. Your grandmother lived there for 40 years. He hadn't mentioned squatters, but this seemed like exactly the kind of town where someone would assume an empty building was communal property. Rowan spotted a doorway behind the counter marked with a handwritten sign, Private, Staff Only. Beyond it, a narrow staircase climbed into darkness. She should leave, call the police, or the lawyer, or someone whose job description included confronting potential intruders. That would be the smart thing to do. Instead, she pulled out her phone, turned on the flashlight, and started up the stairs. The steps creaked under her weight, each one announcing her presence with a sound like a gunshot in the silence. The stairwell was papered in vintage coffee advertisements and botanical prints, their colors faded to sepia. At the top, a door stood slightly ajar, light seeping through the gap. Rowan pushed it open. The apartment was a studio, maybe 400 square feet, tucked under the eaves, slanted ceilings, exposed beams, carved with symbols that might have been decorative or might have been something else.
A kitchenette in one corner, a bed covered in a faded quilt in another, a small desk piled with papers and books. Every surface was draped with more plants, but unlike the ones downstairs, these were thriving, their leaves glossy and green, despite weeks of apparent neglect. And perched on the back of the desk chair, watching her with unblinking yellow eyes, was a cat. Rowan exhaled. Oh, thank God, you're just a... The cat was black, scruffy, with one ear that looked like something had taken a bite out of it years ago. It studied her with an expression that seemed far too intelligent for a stray. Hey, buddy, you must be hungry, huh? I'll bet there's food downstairs, or I can run to the store. The cat stood, stretched with deliberate precision, and jumped down from the chair. It walked towards her, tail high, and then sat directly in her path, still staring. Okay, you're a little